Hey Whitewater family, super excited to be here with you for Hope Groups Week 2. I know you guys are probably still getting to know each other, so as we get into this, we're going to give you guys a few minutes to maybe reintroduce yourselves, go around again, and just make sure everybody has the faces with the names. And as you're doing that, we also have a good kind of group starter question for you guys. If you had 8 hours this week with no judgment and nothing to do, what would you spend it on? Absolutely no judgment, so if you want to go outside and pick up rocks, then you can go outside and pick up rocks. I won't be going outside today because it's a little dreary, but whatever you guys want to do with your 8 hours, tell your group. Thank you so much for being with here, and after you're done answering those questions, Mike will be back here to give you guys some more groups content.
All right, welcome to week 2. Today we're going to kick off a conversation about the ancient hope. The ancient hope. Now I know that for those of us that are here, most of you are watching it like on streaming video. We got big TVs. We're living in the modern age, but there is the reality that we have to wrestle with, and that is that we are not actually that different. For all of our technology, we are not actually that different from the way that people were 100, 200, 500, 1,000, even several thousand years ago. People are basically people. And the struggles that we have today, even though we feel like, oh no, now it's different, now it's new, the reality is that the struggles that we have today are actually a lot of the same struggles that people have been having for centuries, for millennia. It's the human condition, right? And so the question, how do we get the hope that we need to move forward? How do we move on in the face of not having hope? This is actually not a new question. This is something that's actually been discussed by philosophers and thinkers since almost the dawn of time. There's a great trove of wisdom in the Old Testament of the Bible. Now I want to pause for a minute. I know there's people that are watching this. They're like, I don't know about that Bible thing. That's okay. You don't have to think that the book is perfect or inspired to believe what we're going to talk about next. At the very least, though, you should be able to recognize that this is it's a source, it's a document that talks a lot about the hope of the ancients, all right? And so even if you're like, I don't know if that thing's real, and I don't know if I believe in those people, then you can still look at it and say, okay, but like if I said to you, hey, there's this ancient Chinese proverb, you'd be like, okay, I can buy that. So we're gonna go with some ancient Hebrew proverbs and we'll dig in that way, all right? So bear with me as we walk through this. So there's a quotation that I actually love by a 20th century author, Walker Percy. And this is what he says. He says, why does no one find it remarkable that in most world cities today there are Jews but not one single Hittite, even though the Hittites had a great flourishing civilization while the Jews nearby were a weak and obscure people? When one meets a Jew in New York or New Orleans or in Paris or Melbourne, it is remarkable that no one considers this event remarkable. If there are Jews here, why are there not Hittites here? Show me one Hittite in New York City. I love that phrase. It says, show me one Hittite in New York City. Because if you go back 3,000 years, it's the Hittites, not the kingdom of Israel, that's really the powerhouse. It's like, man, they're going to last. They're built for it. They're going to stick around. Those people are going to be here for a long time. The kingdom of Israel was always a nation on the margins, even in its most powerful days, even at the very peak, the top of the ladder for Israel. It was always not as strong as its surrounding neighbors. It was always the weakest nation in the area, even when it was at its strongest, right? And so it's fascinating to look at it and to realize that for the people of Israel, at the time that they were even in their strongest, their hope was never in the future. It was always in the past. Their hope was never in the future, it was always in the past. That's totally the opposite of the way that we tend to think about things. We tend to think about progress as like this steady climb, and man, I don't know if it's good right now, but someday it's going to be good, right? Progress is the key. And so we as a society are very future oriented. And I'm good with that. I'm not opposed to that. There's a lot that's really good about that. But it's a different thing to put our hope in the future as it is to put our hope in the past. And the people of Israel very much rooted their hope in the past. They said, it is the past that gives me hope for the future. So they had a keen sense of history, and it's you find it all through the Hebrew scriptures, all through the Christian Old Testament. Phrases like, for example, God would speak and God would say, I am the God who brought you out of Egypt. I am the God who did this. I'm the God who did that. And there is this sense in the Old Testament where people are able to have hope in the future because of what has gone before. See, Israel had a history book. Israel had a history book. The kingdom of Israel, the Hebrew people, the Jews, they had a history book of what they had gone through. And then every time they went to a new thing, every time a new thing happened, every time there was a new obstacle to overcome, every time there was a new hardship, they were able to look back and say, not just look forward, oh, here's how this could work out, here's how this could all come together for good. They would actually look back and say, no, we've been through things like this before. We've been through hardship before. We've been through pain before. We've been through these types of things before, and because we've made it before, we know we can make it now. The funny thing is that all of us actually have a history book. Each of us has a history book. Our family has a history book. My family does. Your family does. I'm thinking about the family that I grew up in, right? So when I was 8 years old, my dad was biking. That was his normal exercise. He was a road biker, and so not motorcycle, but like actual racing bikes, the kind where they strap your feet into the bike. You know what I'm talking about? And I remember being 8 years old, and he was out biking before I went to school, and wasn't back in time, so my mom was going to take me to school, and we got a phone call. And I remember backpack on, ready to go out the door, and the phone rings, and my mom picks it up, and my dad had been in an accident, and he had gotten actually clipped by a car, and the steering wheel or the handlebars turned, and he went over the bike face first into the ground. Was in a coma for 3 days, didn't think he was going to make it, and even after he came to, had a significant amount of ongoing physical injuries. It was one of the hardest things that our family, when I was growing up, that my family had ever been through, and it was hard. It was hard. I remember the first time I saw him in the hospital, I didn't recognize him because he was so mangled from the accident. I remember jumping on his lap after he had hip surgery. I remember jumping on his lap and him almost passing out from the pain. I remember these things that happened when I was a kid. And at the time, it felt like there was nothing good that was ever going to come out of it. It didn't feel like a good thing. There was nothing about it that felt good. But I also remember, as I got older, that we as a family looked back on that, not as, man, remember that terrible thing that happened? Wasn't that terrible? We looked back on it and said, every time there was a new challenge, every time there was a new obstacle, we were able to look at it and say, we can get through this. We can get through this. I remember when I was a little older, I was probably 12, 14, I'm trying to think exactly. I was finally going to get braces. I had terrible teeth, and it was time. I was finally ready to get braces. My sister and I both were, and went to the doctor to get braces, and he said, hey, to my sister, hey, there's a little lump here, and you need to get that taken out before we put the braces on. I thought, that's weird. We never saw that lump there before in our upper jaw, and so we scheduled an appointment. By the time we got to the doctor, by the time the surgeon was able to take a look at it, it was twice as big as it had been before. I thought, that's not normal. They ran the tests, and we found out it was a very aggressive bone cancer. And so all the talk of the braces went to the side, and it was untreatable by radiation and chemo and all those things. So the only thing that could be done was actually the removal of the bone. And so my sister lost all of the bone in her mouth up to almost to the eye socket. I mean, all of the roof of her mouth, all those things. Years of reconstructive surgeries. But today, she is a beautiful, healthy, happy 30-something. I'm not sure exactly how old she is. And at the time, I would never wish that on anybody. It was terrible for her. It was terrible for our family in a lot of ways. But we also got through it. And so she is, to this day, one of the bravest people I've ever met. As a cancer survivor, there is nothing that happens in life that she doesn't look at and think, I can get through this, right? I can get through this. It's hard. Yeah, it's hard, but I can get through it. And so there's a thing that happens when we develop a history book, where we start being able to look back on our life and recognize points of pain, not just as times when we went through something bad, but also as times that we got through it. As we're able to transform our pain into strength, then what happens is that we're able to draw on that in all kinds of new situations. Casey Tyget wrote a book called As I Recall, and he talked about memory. He says that memory is the process by which mistakes become wisdom, right? So far I've talked about external things that happened, but I mean, You've probably never experienced this, but there's things that I can look back on my life and say, yeah, I screwed that up. Yeah, I was wrong on that. Man, I made the wrong choice. And now I've got some wisdom to make the right choice because the memory has been transformed from mistakes into wisdom. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a little bit of time in our group just to talk about some things that we've gone through. Now, it doesn't have to be everything, and I don't want anybody to talk for 20 minutes, all right? You've got however many people in your group. We've got another couple sections to get through after this. So don't go for long periods of time, but tell us a little bit, right? This is part of how we get to know each other. Also, we get to know each other by getting to know each other's stories. So tell us a little bit about your life. Give us one or two, more than a sentence, but less than a page, right? Give me a couple paragraphs, 2-3 minutes at least on, give me a couple times that you've gone through something very, very difficult. And the reality is, I know that you made it through it because you're here. So by definition, you made it through. All right? So tell me some things that were hard. You don't even have to tell everybody, here's the things that were good, that came out of it that were good. Just tell us a time, man, this is something that was really hard, but we got through it. Give us a couple of those, share some of those stories, and then we'll come back and figure out some more. We'll process some more how to tell those stories in a way that leads to hope. So go ahead and share those, and then I'll see you in a couple minutes. All right, welcome back. Hey, thank you for that. I know that sometimes, especially if you're with people that you don't know real well, it can take some guts to show the scars a little bit, to reveal a little bit about yourself, tell some stuff that you've gone through. And so I just want you to know that I am honored if you shared anything like that with the group, and if you felt like, man, I'm just really not ready to tell them the realest stuff yet, I'm just give them a little bit of the more surface stuff for now. I get that too. I'm okay with that. So whatever you did, just want to honor you for it and thank you for it. So we talked about having a history book as a family, right? Or you as a person. But we also have a history book with God. There are times in your life when you needed God to show up, and He did. There's times in your life where everything seemed like it was coming against you, where you didn't see a way out, and yet the right thing happened at the right time in the right place, and things just kind of came together. The funny thing about this life is that there are things that are perfectly clear in retrospect that you can look back on and say, man, absolutely, this is what was going on. But in the moment are not clear at all. There's times that you can look at and say, man, a year later, 2 years later, 3 years down the road, you can say, man, it is amazing how God was at work in that moment, or how things were really all set up to bring me to this point here. But at the time, you sat there and looked at it and you thought, man, I don't know what's going on. I don't like this at all. This doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel right. It's a funny thing that in the moment, sometimes we're completely unable to see what's happening, but it all becomes clear in retrospect. I know there's people in this hope group, or there could be people in your hope group that aren't exactly sure kind of what's going on with them and God, right? You've been away from God for a while. Maybe you're checking things out for the first time. Maybe you've given up on Christianity. You've given up on church. Maybe you've even given up on God, all right? But I don't believe that God's given up on you. I don't believe, even if you've walked away from God, I don't think that He's ever walked away from you. I think that God has been faithfully pursuing you from the beginning of your life. There's a verse that I love in the New Testament. It's one of the words of Jesus that He said. And, we like Jesus as a good teacher, right? And so here's something that Jesus said. He said, since the creation of the world, my Father has been at work, and I too am working. It's in John 5. He says, basically, they're like, man, why are you working? Well, you ought to be taking a rest, right? And He says, look, since the creation of the world, my Father has been at work, and I too am working. And I think that's true in my life. I think it's true in yours. That maybe at the time, maybe at this exact moment, it's hard to see how God could be at work. But in retrospect, it just becomes clearer. I believe that your whole life, throughout your whole life, even when you weren't aware of Him, even when you weren't following Him, even when you weren't pursuing Him, even if you didn't know that He existed, I believe that God has been at work in your life, bringing you to this very moment and then bringing you forward into the future. I think that when we look back, it enables us to look forward. To this very day, He is working. And it matters that we're able to dip into that history book, not just our own history, right? Not just opening up and say, here's what I've gone through, but also, this is what God has brought me through. This is where I was, and this is how I got to here. And I think that God has been at work in your story, even if it's been hard for you to see it. So what I'd like to do in our last little bit of time together is really to explore that a little bit as a group. What are some ways, what are some times that maybe you didn't feel close to God at the time, but in retrospect, it's very clear that he was at work? Or maybe that's not even right. Maybe you did know. Maybe it was clear even then. There are times when it's like, oh, even in the midst of this hardship, I can see God at work, right? We get better at recognizing that as we go through, as we go along. So what are the ways and what are the times that you have seen God at work in the past? And how does that inform the way we live in the future? There's a song that we sing here at Whitewater, and it's called The Goodness of God. The Goodness of God. We've sang it a couple times in this series, and I love it. I love it, but I hate singing it because I can almost never make it through without my voice breaking. You know, I'm in there and we're singing, I'm just getting my jam on and it's good. And this song comes on and the verse starts and I'm still good. But we get to the chorus and it's like, oh, man, I tear up. It hits me hard. And the song goes like this. It goes, all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I'm able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I think that's one of the most theologically profound statements that's in any of the songs that we sing. All of our lives, God has been faithful. He's been so good to us. Whether we knew it or not, he's been good. And part of the way that we respond is to sing of the goodness of God, not just as a way of praising him or thanking him, but also just as a way of expressing how deep our hope is for what comes in the future. I do believe, to the bottom of my heart, I do believe that God has been good to you, maybe in ways that it's hard for you to even grasp. But I think it's worth it for all of us to take a little bit of time and just think back. What are the places where we think God might have been at work? What are the places and the times when we can remember the goodness of God? All right, guys, let's break there. See you next week.
Hey guys, super excited as we finish up week 2 here. I just want to remind you of a few things and give you some thoughts to go on your way with. Share with your group how this week you might need hope, or maybe share with your group who somebody is this week that you could share hope with and how you're going to reach out to them. Also want to make sure to remind you guys, Micah talked today about a way that he found hope inside of some song lyrics, and we think that's an awesome opportunity. And so we have a Songs of Hope night for you guys coming up on February 27th. We want to see you here at Whitewater, joining with us 6:30. Be there and come with your group, sit together. It'll be an awesome night.